Hey, it's Leroy Trusty here, your instructor. I wanted to talk to you about this first chapter. We come into it, the whole issue of standards. We talk about standards and we talk about such things as inspections and citations and penalties. And one of the sites that I have, and this is because of some of my background, and I always like to look at what the IAEA uh, accomplishes or tries to, and what kind of standards they have out there. Not that I'll ever go into an industrial environment or an international environment for nuke, but just kind of give you an idea of a lot of things when we talk about safety standards and such. Because I have worked with people who say they know safety and understand safety, who have also told me that the standard, the 1910 or the 1926 or 1950, any of the 29 CFRs, they're guidelines, and they're not. They are actual regulations. And so those are rules and regulations that, as a company, you work for an organization, and even the military adheres to that. Now, the Air Force and the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Army have their various standards to meet what we look at when I was in the military unique situations. But today, in today's military, in so many cases, you have a lot of civilians that are working in that job doing what used to be only uniformed people would do. OSHA is going to be one of the primary products that's going to be used for regulation, especially when we talk about civilians, civilian contractors, and and those types of folks that are working there, even civilians themselves, the GSWGs and such. So we have those situations there. In this case here, I'm just going to go through this a little bit. This kind of gives you an idea as well. Now, when we look at the operation, we're really not going to take a look at the area that's called degree or decree and atomic law. But what we do have is we have industrial standards. A lot of those are just how business is done, how business is accomplished. And then we have regulatory guides, and these are guidelines. It's like we see our consumer safety product guides, or we may see some guides out there saying, here's what we recommend. But the key thing is when we get up to the triangle there, and then all we have is regulation. So it's important to understand a lot of how that works. We very similar to this. We have our standards out there, very basic standards, and a lot of these standards are what people put together. And maybe standard is the wrong term because it's not really regulation. And we talk about the standards 1910 being a standard, but we have standards out there, and then we have regulatory guides, some recommendations. But really, the regulation is what we're talking about here. And so that's some of the key things. When we talk about workplace standards, I always like to throw into the Google search workplace standards just to take a look at this. And of course, the top one we see is OSHA, and then we see the laws and regulations. And I recommend that when you go to this website, when you go to the .gov website, you really take a look at everything that's in there. But I also want you to start taking a look at some other sites too. Take a look at what FAA has. Take a look at what the mine standards have. Take a look at some of the other standards, USDA, and some of those other items out there, other places, because when we start talking about EPA and their involvement in a lot of what we do, it's important to understand where some of these are, because depending on our job, depending on what work we're doing, we may have somebody coming in from OSHA, but they may be taking a look at it referring to some of these other standards as well. Because once you start digging a hole and it's beyond excavation, now it becomes a mining issue. And so there may be some mining rules involved in that. So you have to be aware of that when we're talking about the standards and such. Another place that we look, and oftentimes OSHA refers to it, and this is where we're talking about like industry standards, for instance, ANSI standards, NFPA, international building codes, international fire codes. We take a look at that triangle. We see these as really the kind of the baselines here, the industrial standards. UL is more of, if we're looking at it from that standpoint, regulatory guidelines. And you see, so ANSI's an area where you maybe end up going to when you're talking about fall protection, for instance. You want to see what the ANSI standard states in this area, what's required as well. Or if we're talking electrical, then you may want to go to the NFPA, the NEC products, or maybe you want to take a look at the international building codes and those areas there. Also, when we start getting into this, and this is discussed a little bit in your reading, is, for instance, now you see regulations elsewhere. Some are more restrictive. For instance, Texas has a workplace safety and health requirements. Texas also has other places where we look at gas pipe. If we're talking about gas lines or we're talking about propane tanks and stuff, they have their own regulations for that as well, that are more restrictive than OSHA. So don't think that OSHA is the end all when you're looking at it. Take a look at what your state requires as well. You'll either look at the Department of Labor, you'll take a look at the Department of Employment. Wyoming, for instance, I go into the Department of Employment and find a lot of information, useful information there. I'm not going to tell you that I worked for a couple of companies where I basically took Wyoming's Department of Employment guidelines for work, redeveloped them, just kind of shook them out and changed a few names in them, and now that was the company's policy. But it works because that's what was needed for that. So you have Texas that has theirs, Massachusetts is one, Virginia has a workplace safety area. Let me see, I'm just going through the list here. Illinois has one, Oregon has one. Let's see, who else? A lot of state, New Mexico, for instance, you'll have your New Mexico OSH people. Let's see, let me go through this list, see if there's any other lists here. California has, of course, very stringent. You're talking about Title VIII. Canada is a good place if you're looking for information, especially when we're looking at areas where we have a lot of international workers or we may be crossing the border. Like, for instance, when I was doing some work, I was having to work in England and having to get into the British standards and really take a look at what those requirements were. And then I was doing some work in another place where it was more Australian or Canadian when doing some consulting with Canada up in that area. And then we have contractors that come down, maybe from Canada, and they're confused. And so what we want to do is lay out, okay, here's the comparison. Here's what we're looking at from the Canadian standards to what OSHA has. So it's good to know. I mean, these are things that you need to be aware of. State of California, ca.gov, Missouri. Let's see, I'm trying to think of who all we've talked about. But anyway, we take a look at standards. Now, with that in mind, now what I want to talk about is an issue. We're talking about citations. And I really want you to understand this whole issue with citations. And so I'm going to do a quick screen change here, and we'll get in. Now, as we take a look at the regulation here, I'm going to take a look at one area, and it's under machine guarding. And it's the subtitle to this is the forging machines. And the reason why I'm going to go to this one is because it's unique enough to where we can get into some discussion. Now, something could come up, and maybe you have some forging operations in your company. And so somebody asks the question, and they're really wanting to get some information about grinding. And that's what they say. And so what I see oftentimes when individuals do these hazard assessments, these documents, they just put the very general in. Well, forging, I just look at the title here, I see forging, so it must be 1910.28. Well, let's say I really want to get down to the specifics of grinding. I've already completed my forging, and if you've ever been in a forging operation, it's really it's an interesting thing, especially in the middle of summer, and there's no real airflow going through. So there's a whole lot of factors involved in this just besides the forging. And OSHA will come in and they will find that out for you as well if you have any problems. But I want to look at the issues of grinding. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to look at some areas here, hammers and presses, and what takes place there, what kind of power machine. And again, understanding exactly what the job is the key thing. Oftentimes, as safety people, we sit back in the office, wear a nice tie, but we really don't get out there and work with the people to find out exactly what it is that they're working with. You know, for instance, 1910.218A3V, tongue shall be of sufficient length to clear the body of the worker in case of kickback. Interesting. Sometimes we don't think about that, but when you're taking a look at the job and you're looking at a press, how long are the tongs are if they have to hold tongs to hold those in after they put them into the heat and put them under the press? How long are those tongs? Are they long enough and such? So be aware of, you got to read through, not just look at the very basics, because OSHA will come in and let me tell you, they know their stuff. So let's just go down, and somebody said something about grinding. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll on down, and I'm going to read and see if there's anything that deals with grinding in the area of forging. And that I find that way down here in the area of 1910.218 J4 and J5. We see shot blast, and that is when we're doing some shot blasting of some materials, you know, sandblasting type thing, but we're using shot. What's required? The cleaning chamber shall have doors or guards to protect the workers or operators. If we're going to get into the grinding aspect of it, let's take a look at it. It's 1910.218 J5. And if I'm referencing that, I want to make sure I drill down far enough to find this information. Personal protective equipment shall be used in grinding operations, and equipment shall be used and maintained in accordance with, now remember, mentioned something about the ANSI, in accordance with. Now the OSHA says you must follow the ANSI B7.1-1970, and that's when the standard was created, safety code for the use and care and protection of abrasive wheels, which is incorporated by reference as specified in section 1910.6, and you're going to see this again, 1910.215 when we talk about grinding. But it's important that you look at all aspects. What specifically is that job? This is information for you as you're looking at operations. How detailed do you need to get? You really need to drill down. You need to really understand it. And that's the reason why I like to use the online standard, because I can put in their specific words, and I may see something in here from 1926. I may see something in here from 1915. But I'm going to look for that 1910 reference, and I may find several references to grinding operations, but I need to make sure I understand exactly what the kind of grinding operation is going on and what's focused. So I just wanted to add this in here as you're getting ready into this discussion. You may already be into it, just so that you're aware of, here are some things that you need to be aware of, especially when we're looking at standards. Because I may go into a company, I might write you up for general duty clause. If I can't find the specific, but I know it's unsafe and I can see where people get hurt, or I may go into the ANSI and say, you're not following ANSI because here's what OSHA states, or if it says the International Building Code, or if it says something else, I can put all those references in there. So it's important to know all that. Don't come up with a general 1910.218. You need to drill down. So as you're getting into this, well, I can say good luck, I guess. Get into it, really study it out. Figure out what it is specifically that's being looked for in this, because that's also a key thing too. I need to, when you answer that, tell me why you answered that, where you got your references, okay? Because that's key as well. All right, well, with that, I'm going to let you be, and you guys have a good day.